right, when it comes to this idea, sideshow, sorry. When it comes to this idea of how Riot actually deals with like disciplinary issues in Valorant, I want to get your take on this, mate, because the other thing that's interesting is since you come from TF2, if people don't know, that's a game that effectively the game dev just pretended that was like the red-headed stepkid locked in the attic, and they were all just like, the attic is our world. This is Plato's cave. This is esports. So obviously you come like I do from a game where like you're like, wow, the game dev be involved. You know, we in the community are going to figure it out, right? Like the TO has to ban him, or let's witch hunt this fucker. What do you think about the way Riot's handled it? Because obviously that was a big thing they had in League of Legends, if people don't know. If something happened, a player said something naughty, there was dispute, someone poached a player, broke a rule, they would come out, they'd do a post, it was like competitive ruling, and then they say like, you know, sort of the decree of what they're going to do to you and what the punishment is. And in theory, there's an appeals process, but my joke is I think that just goes in the recycle bin at Riot fucking offices and they just do whatever they want anyway, because spoiler, it's their game dev, they are the gods of this they are the tiny golden gods of Valorant. So what do you think about the approach they've been taking in Valorant? Because that's one area, by the way, I was actually also very worried about a lot of my CS mates coming to the game, because they're coming from a game in CSGO where you can just like hard flame the game dev and you know nothing will ever happen to you. And I was like, boys, you don't know what world you're walking into in a Riot game. I told some of them, like, even the talent, like, listen, it's going to sound mad, I'm telling you this, but don't flame the game dev because you're not going to get hired. Like, it's going to be over. So what have you thought about their approach overall? Because they have their own approach to it. I wonder how people are taking it so far.
Well, I haven't seen anything petty and vindictive like that as of yet. So, you know, jury's out in that regard. But I think there's a lot of stuff that they've really missed in the first couple of years. I think this foundation that they've set may end up coming back to bite them. I think particularly with they've been extremely hands-off with any match-fixing allegations for people that have come from CS, of course.
Yes.
But, I mean, I think everybody was waiting for the ESIC report that has just vanished. And so...
All I'll say on that is it's implied behind the scenes among the people who really know this stuff in CSGO that, like, there's maybe, like, an unofficial soft agreement among, like, Team Orgs and potentially Riot that if they do a franchise league, they might just ban those match fixers. I think it's one of those things where I don't know if they're going to publicly come out with it, Sideshow. I think it might be one of those things where they're going to handle it, like, behind closed doors or something. Yeah, certainly there's no public messaging on that. Like, no one knows where they're at.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's no public messaging whatsoever. But also, I think but it doesn't set the like hardline precedent if you handle it behind closed doors that kind of stuff is unacceptable. True. And it will rear its head in Valorant. It's absolutely inevitable that things like this will happen.
Yes.
And on top of that too, you have they literally had. Do you remember the Turkish money laundering scandal through Twitch?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You had the potential best player in the game and the player and team won at Champions actually implicated in that, and to a fairly small degree compared to the size that it could have been for a scandal like that, right? But it's still a player has been directly implicated in it, and there was the only communication that came from them was, we're going to wait until Twitch Turkey provides us more information, and then it just disappears. And this now seems to me to be a running theme with the way that Riot handles big stuff, is just they post like, we'll see what's happening, and then they just quietly either deal with it behind closed doors or don't deal with it at all. It's impossible to tell from your outside POV. And then with smaller stuff, they have horrendously odd rulings for infractions. Like at the moment, there's like small exploits that end up getting punished in vastly different ways depending on which region you're playing in.
By the way, a very famous thing about Riot as well is like each judgment only has an internal coherency to that one judgment.
Yes.
As in, if you were to try and figure out like, well, what's the rules here? Like, you know, what does doing A mean that happens to me? It tends to change depending on who the person is, like you say, what year it is, what they like. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason often to me. Yeah, it's hard to figure out. Like, is this twice as bad as what you know what I mean? Like, you can't. Yeah. Like, sometimes the scale's off to me.
So their communication has been very clear. You know, your whole thing with like they post their competitive ruling thing. That happens with the small infractions. If someone exploits something that's clearly in the rules, then they post something. Does the ruling make sense? No, it's frequently off by a massive degree. But I think part of the issue here is for larger things, they post something and then just let it slide away. One of the recent things was T1 having their coach communicate with them via private DMs. Oh, yeah. And then there was footage of G2's coach being in their voice communication with them. And that didn't really get any public, I don't want to say public attention because it did from the community, but public attention from Riot or the tournament organizer or anything. And that, to me, is the level of competitive integrity problem where you need to be trying to stamp it out early because otherwise everyone is doing it. And I've had coaches come and tell me, coaches that have been implicated in stuff come and tell me, everyone is doing this, man. You look at every VOD, everyone is doing it. And if that's the degree to which it's happening, of course, the devs put in a weird situation where you don't want to have to ban everybody, but you need to be hardline with some things. Otherwise, I can see the same. They had the opportunity to learn from CS. CS has had horrendous coaching bug scandal recently that just decimated many teams, or like not teams, but like the community's perception of how valid certain online results were just utterly destroyed.
Even the notion of
match
who
fixing
pros
everything.
are. Like basically, before that scandal happened, if you'd have asked a random fan, like a real fan, not like a total pleb, like a person who followed, let's say like Evil Geniuses was his favourite team for 5 years. Like if you asked someone like that, they would just tell you like, oh no, they would never cheat like that. Well, but there was all the usual corp like, why would they risk their career and stuff? Whereas as it turned out, like it was like 37 coaches if people don't know. It wasn't like 2. Yeah. It was loads and by the way, it ran the gamut. It was no-namers to like legendary, like, major winners and people who like were fucking like would be in the Hall of Fame. Like everyone was doing it for real. In fact, one of the problems with these areas that you're talking about, by the way, is this is a slippery slope, but this happened in CS. Another thing that happened in Counter-Strike at the end of 2020, the first online year, was we had a couple of instances where top teams on the stream, on their cameras, you could see that like, maybe they have a stream open in the background, so they're watching the stream 30 seconds delayed, or maybe someone could communicate info. And the problem, and this is why it's a really dodgy area, was even though individual tournament organisers, including the one I worked for, Flashpoint, if we found that, we took like individual action and like find the player, the team rather, like, like 10K, and you make a public statement, it's not allowed, blah, blah. The vibe in the industry, though, was really disturbing, which went like this. It's very difficult to enforce, so maybe there shouldn't be any rules. Which is like,
and that's the same thing that was being discussed recently with Valorant too. If you can't enforce it, with the coach thing, if you can't enforce it, then why can't the coaches just talk all the time?
Yeah.
But I think that's a horrendous slope to get down. I think the more barriers you put in place, the less likely people are to cheat, and the more you can be punitive once it actually comes to light. Yes. And I think that's much better than having the lack of enforceability change your entire direction of what coaches do in the game. I think that's a terrible idea to go down, but it's a popular sentiment at the moment because online gameplay is fundamentally flawed, and it's all really that Valorant has known. If you were good at online, you would probably be in the contention for like 4th best in the world right now. If you just dominated everything online but then flopped at LAN, people would still think of you as like I don't know, maybe top 4 is too generous, but top 8 team, absolutely.
That's definitely a weird part about Valorant if you think about it, because I actually can't think of any game that's comparable right now, dude, where the joke is you actually could be someone who is only an onliner, but you could get to the LAN. So there aren't many games, there aren't many esports scenes that have that structure. So that's kind of like some old school throwback shit to like the early 2000s or something, mate,
Well, it's because Valorant's a pandemic baby.
It is.
It's we kind of yet to know what Valorant is outside of that. Outside of that's kind of structure.
We'll have to wait for the LAN to see the players unmasked. See who they actually really are. There you go.
You also
see if they can breathe that rarefied air of the land. I'll keep it going. I'll extend it in metaphor to become really uncomfortable. Keep going.
You were talking about the difference between LAN and online as well, and we've still never had a tournament with an audience. So that's, we've only had like 0.5 of a LAN where, sure, the game is different, the stakes are different, but you don't have the pressure of a crowd and the audio problems of a crowd and all of that stuff that also adds to people either overperforming or underperforming when it comes to those big pressure environments. So that is something I'm really looking forward to across 2022. I think VCT Korea just announced that they're going to have an audience. Yes.
I saw the clip.
And that's the old like Apex Studio.
Yeah, it'll be banging.
Yeah, I think that's going to be
the old
fantastic.
OGN one that got sold.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm so jealous. I always wanted to. That was one thing when I first got into esports. I was always like, I would love to just do one thing with OGN, and then obviously the whole thing got shut down. So I was always gutted. But the fact they're going to be using that in Valorant is so exciting, just from like a legacy.
Yeah, nostalgia, all that shit.
Yeah. No, that's going to be cool. But it will be really interesting to see them have an audience. Like, it was very strange at Masters, like. No, we were like one of like 5 people in the room, like watching like everything happen on the stage, which is why I kept posting videos on Twitter, because I was like, it was just a very bizarre experience, and just how much better it would have been with like a crowd would have been so sick.
Yeah, because the other thing to say as well is this is actually something we just went through in CSGO. We almost like tested so we can tell you guys how it works. Basically, there always was like a competitive ladder. Obviously, like the most simple version is, are you good online, and then do you get good on LAN? Because obviously you have to go through being online to become a LAN player. And it's just like, it's like chapters in your career. You have to go through that to get to the next stage. But what we've recently found in CSGO particularly is even just a LAN, this is why I think it's relevant to Valorant for when you get a crowd. Even just a LAN is very different from the same LAN with a crowd of people in the room. Like the crowd is the final frontier. Because if people don't know, in CSGO, during the online period at the beginning of last year, we actually had, fully enough, it's just like the same as in your game, Gambit. The Russian Gambit team became they were literally the number 1 team in CSGO. And online, the eye test was like they were one of the best teams to ever play Counter-Strike. The problem they had was, when they went to the LANs, like the major, they were still a good team. They were maybe like, the 4th or 5th best team. They were still quality, and they could make the semis or something like that. But you saw, as soon as the crowd element got involved, that was the one part they had no experience of, because they're basically players who came up in the online era. So whereas every other team to some extent at the top in CS, has some old player that was around a couple of years ago, or just as someone who's a super veteran, you saw that actually like it takes essentially that you have to put in a certain amount of reps in front of crowds before your whole team is going to be comfortable. Maybe 1 or 2 you get lucky and you're just the guy who's just naturally cool. But that's why, to me, also, it's got to suck a little bit for the people who did come over from CSGO and other pro games, because you're not really getting to flex that element of your toolkit, as it were. Like, you would be cool under pressure. You would play a block. You could make a call when the crowd's there. The new guy might not be able to, So at the moment, you've evened the playing field.
You want an exact example of this, actually? 100 Thieves played at NALCQ, which was the last chance qualifier tournament to get you to Champions. And it started out as a LAN, and then everything exploded. Players started getting COVID, etc. The whole thing had to be cancelled. And they went, from what I remember, they went 2-0 in the online, in the LAN portion. They were winning. I don't want to say they were dominating, but from what I remember, the results were pretty significantly like one-sided. It was them easily winning their games on LAN. And then it gets delayed. They went back to online and just went 0-2 and lost to teams that were you weren't expecting them to lose to, especially Rise. They lost to Cloud9 in the second one, but they lost to Rise when they were on a hot streak, and it felt very much watching it like like they had been cooled off. Either their form was great at the LAN, or what I think is more likely, they were just better in that scenario than they were online because of the player experience that they had.
It is one thing as well that I think is a potentially interesting thing that will come about is not just talking about like teams that don't have like LAN experience, but very specifically, a lot of the youngest players in Valorant are like the duelists. They're like jet players, they're young rookie gunners who are the star players for these teams. Like, how much is the star power of those teams going to change if they get on a stage and like that's their player who has no experience playing in front of how many tens of thousands of people or whatever? Like, is that gonna because I think that role specifically, it's not necessarily the most important role. In fact, I would argue it's not, but like, it's the role that people are going to be the most hyped to see and expecting the most from, because it's the most flashy, right? And I think that could be a big thing for all these, this is their induction into esports, but they've only ever known it to be online or at best at a crowdless LAN.
I was keeping track of that actually at Champions. I had a spreadsheet that was comparing people's stats online to people's stats at LAN. Yeah. So I just keep it. Who was the most different? Let me look, actually. So the most different, okay, I've just pulled it up, was Durka, who is a player from Fnatic who overperformed. So like that was a big overperformance. The the biggest underperformance was equivalent to actually. Wait there. No, sorry.
Which NA player was it?
Sorry, I'm ranking it by best, so that's not true. Let me look at. Okay, so when you look at the largest differences, the largest differences were people underperforming, which makes sense, right? Because it's always easier to shit the bed and do absolutely nothing. Yeah. But they were from teams that just got slammed as well. So the problem with looking at stats like that is that it's like the team that dominated Japan, Crazy Raccoon, or not dominated. There was 2 good teams in Japan at the time, or okay teams. But once they get to the online stage, they're just going to get destroyed. So they've done insanely well all the time online because they're in a bad region. They come to the champions tournament and get destroyed. So that's not so much the players choking as they just weren't ready for that level of competition. Yeah. But if you're looking at big players where a lot was expected of them, I think you're looking at Victor from Team Envy, who was negative 24%. Compared to his just the basic stat of ACS, which is their boiled up stat that they use. But that would also make sense because the guy had COVID when he was playing in Champions. And he said he was really sick during that period of time. So we didn't realize how sick he was. We were watching it and we were like, fuck, this is a mad underperformance from this guy. Holy crap. And then it comes out afterwards, the guy's got COVID and we were like, okay, but how ill actually was he? Because you can get it really mild.
You can never know exactly.
Too much. And apparently he was pretty sick. And so I look at that now and I'm like, right, might have been a bit unfair on him while the tournament was going on, actually. But yeah, then there was there's a couple of players from Fnatic or Vision Strikers where they didn't perform as well as they were doing online. But some of that, again, is because they were just the Vision Strikers team was dominating online and then comes to Champions. So it's difficult to tell all of the time when you're looking at Valorant stats because the teams don't get all boiled up very often. They just tend to dominate their own region and then see if they can hang with the big boys when it actually happens 3 times a year.
Because the duelist that I remember getting the LAN buff was Kellogg's, but that was at Masters, not at Champs because CG2 weren't there. But again, that wasn't in front of a crowd. So A, would that be the same? And B, would Kellogg's be on a team that would actually make it to a LAN? Because he's obviously kind of gone down to a team that's not in the VCT at the moment. So
and he's a very young guy. He's a young guy that thrives from that showmanship element too. Which is often a good, I think that's normally a good indicator that somebody's gonna be able to perform under pressure when they actually have that charismatic showmanship element to them. Those are the people that tend to thrive in those scenarios because they actually enjoy having eyes on them. It fires them up.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.